My food company is just a small home business, yet one neighbor treats it like a threat. When she stole my food, I didn't just let it go. I decided to get back at her in a way she'll never forget. One weekend afternoon, as the sun began to sink below the horizon, the neighborhood was as quiet as usual. I was sitting in my cozy kitchen space, running my small home food business. The special dishes I prepare every day are carefully packed and sent out, warmly received by customers. But today, something was different. It wasn't the satisfaction from the dishes I sent out, but an unexpected event that would change everything. My home business has a spacious kitchen area where I always pour my heart into creating delicious dishes. This space always brings me peace, a place where I can relax and be creative. But today, this very place became the scene of a betrayal I never saw coming. Karen is a woman in her early 40s who always carries herself as if she is the one with authority in the neighborhood. She lives alone in a large house and always maintains a cold, somewhat arrogant attitude that makes everyone feel distant. As an important member of the Homeowners Association, HOA, Karen always wants to control everything in the neighborhood. She thinks she is the only one with the right to decide what is right or wrong and never stops trying to interfere in the lives of those around her. Since I started my home food business, Karen has been the first to speak out against it. She always felt that, although my business was small, its growing success posed a threat to the peaceful stability of our neighborhood. Every time I made a delivery or had a customer pick up food, Karen would find some excuse to complain. She didn't like me working from home, constantly saying that it would disrupt the living space of the people around me. Not only that, but Karen would also frequently show up at my house at unnecessary times, always casually walking by and peeking into my windows as if she were surveilling me. If I made a dish with a fragrant smell, she would immediately criticize me for disturbing the peace of the neighborhood. She would often come knocking on my door to inquire about my business practices, but in reality, she just wanted to snoop and cause trouble. Every time, she would find trivial faults, from not notifying about the number of deliveries to my failure to comply with the HOA rules, which she insisted were very strict. On one occasion, she even declared that the products I was selling could pose a health risk to the community, even though I had made sure everything was safe and of high quality. She didn't stop finding fault and complaining about everything I did, always making me feel like an unwanted element in the neighborhood. Every time I saw her lurking around, I felt like there was a critical eye watching me from her. Karen is the kind of person you can never please. When she came near my house, I always felt hostility in her gaze, but I never expected her to go this far. After quietly observing for a long time, I began to notice a shift in Karen's attitude. She was no longer just an annoying person. She had started to feel truly threatened by the growth of my business. Since I began supplying food to the neighborhood, my business had grown stronger. More and more customers came, and I started to receive attention not just from people in the neighborhood, but from others outside it as well. However, Karen could not tolerate this success. She always found ways to interfere with my business and express her displeasure quite clearly. One morning, while I was working in the kitchen, she appeared again. As usual, with an annoyed expression. Another morning with the smell of food in this neighborhood, Karen said, trying to hide the envy in her voice. I wonder if everyone is tolerating this smell. I just gave a small smile and continued with my work. But I knew, the more time passed, the more Karen felt threatened by the growth of my small food business. The reality was that she started paying attention to everything I did, from the dishes I prepared to the orders I delivered. She was always nearby, watching and looking for opportunities to make things difficult. Be careful, I heard her say as she walked past the kitchen. I don't know how you ensure food safety. And so, each day that passed, Karen's dissatisfaction grew. And then one day, things escalated more than ever. On a quiet evening when I had just completed some special dishes for a client, I started cleaning up the kitchen. The tense feeling in the air suddenly gave me the instinct that something was wrong. I had prepared some high-end dishes for an important client and had to finish quickly, but when I opened the refrigerator to retrieve the prepared dishes, I discovered that some of them were missing. I froze, feeling like someone had just broken into my kitchen. Suddenly, I heard a soft sound behind me. When I turned around, I saw Karen sneaking in the corner of the kitchen, holding a box of food I had prepared earlier in the day. "Maris!" I shouted her name, both surprised and angry. She jumped, but then responded with a sly smile. "Oh, I just took a little bit," Karen replied confidently. "You don't need to worry." I was stunned, unable to believe my eyes. Not only had she sneaked and taken the food, but she was standing there so nonchalantly, as if nothing had happened. The expensive, carefully prepared dishes were gone in an instant. I felt slapped in the face, the insult making it impossible to hold back my anger. I wanted to rush in and yell at her, but then I realized that doing so would only make things worse. I took a deep breath, held back the rising anger, and decided not to react impulsively. Instead, I would act discreetly, making Karen pay for it. Rather than simply reporting her, I decided I would act in a more subtle and sophisticated way. She might not leave obvious traces, but I would make her pay in a way she would never anticipate. I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want to blow things out of proportion. I just wanted her to understand the consequences of her wrong actions. One night, when everything had settled down and the neighborhood was asleep, I prepared a special dish, one that I knew for sure Karen wouldn't be able to resist. She wasn't just an ordinary customer, but someone who was always watching my work, always trying to sabotage everything I did. I had grown accustomed to her sneaking into the kitchen and stealing my food, but this time would be different. I would use my wit to turn the tables on her. I decided to add a large amount of honey to the dish. Honey not only made the dish sweeter, but it was also something that attracted cockroaches, the insects that Karen hated the most. I knew that if she ate this dish, the cockroaches would be unable to resist, and they would quickly find their way into her house. After the dish was completed, I didn't rush to deliver it, but kept a portion back so I could monitor the result. A few hours later, as I had predicted, Karen showed up. She came to my house, not because of work or for any reasonable reason, but because she couldn't resist the dish I had prepared. "Just a little something, it's fine," she said, her voice light, but I could sense the greed in her eyes. She had no idea that she was walking into the trap I had set for her. Karen quickly grabbed the dish with honey and sat down, beginning to enjoy it without any suspicion. I watched her eat, feeling a sense of satisfaction growing within me. Every bite she took was a step further into my plan. After she left, I didn't neglect the next step of my plan. I quietly went outside and started placing cockroach bait near areas I knew were easy entry points into her house: windows that weren't tightly closed, gaps between the walls and doors, small cracks in the back wall. These places were perfect for cockroaches to enter, especially the kitchen and bathroom areas, where it was always damp and an ideal breeding ground for them. I didn't just sprinkle cockroach bait in the obvious places, but I also made sure that the small cracks and gaps in the walls became pathways for the cockroaches. The cockroaches would be attracted by the honey left behind in the food and gradually make their way into her house. They would follow each other, from one crack to another, until they had taken over her entire kitchen space. The next morning, as I was preparing for the next workday, I received a call from my neighbor. "Did you know, Karen's house is full of cockroaches. I've never seen her kitchen so bad." They told me that the cockroaches had appeared everywhere in her house, especially in the kitchen, the place where Karen had stolen my food. The cockroaches didn't stop there. They spread throughout every corner of her home, turning her living space into chaos and filth. I couldn't stop laughing when I imagined that scene. A feeling of satisfaction overwhelmed me as I visualized Karen facing this horror. She had become the victim of her own greed and lack of self-control. When I heard from the neighbor that Karen had to call for pest control, I knew I had succeeded. Not only did she have to live with cockroaches, But she also had to face the embarrassment and shame when everyone in the neighborhood knew her house had been attacked by the very insects she hated the most. What mattered more was that I didn't need to speak up or expose her. Karen had brought this upon herself without realizing that she had destroyed her own efforts. She would never forget this lesson, and I would always remember that moment when I used my cleverness to defeat her arrogance. After witnessing the consequences Karen had to endure, I decided that I couldn't let her escape the punishment I had reserved for her. Although I had already taken a covert and clever revenge, I knew that if I stopped there, she wouldn't learn any lesson. Therefore, I did what I thought was necessary to expose the truth. I decided to send the HOA, Homeowners Association, a video I had recorded from the security camera in my house. The video showed Karen sneaking into my house, stealing food, and even eating the honey dish I had prepared. Every step she took, every action she made, was clearly recorded. Everything had been carefully prepared so that, when reviewed, no one could doubt the truth. When the video was sent, I felt a strange satisfaction. Part of me felt like I had won back justice, while the other part knew this was the right thing to do. Karen could no longer deny her actions. She had been exposed. A few days later, the story started spreading throughout the neighborhood. Karen couldn't explain her strange behavior. She tried to justify herself, but no one believed her words. People began to criticize her, not only for stealing my food, but also for the rude and controlling actions she had taken all this time. In the eyes of the neighbors, Karen was not only a thief, but also the one who caused the cockroach disaster in the neighborhood. She had harmed herself, putting herself in an impossible-to-explain situation. Neighbors began accusing Karen of her actions, not just for stealing, but also for the earlier times when she had made this neighborhood tense. She lost all credibility in the community, and her involvement in a small HOA investigation only made things worse. Those who had once supported Karen now began to view her with suspicion and criticism. Meanwhile, I noticed the change in how my neighbors treated me. Those who had once only looked at me with unfamiliar eyes now began to treat me with respect and support. They came closer to me, expressing their regret for what had happened and offering their support. A few even affirmed that they would always stand by me, and Karen's actions were unacceptable. People around me began to stand up for me, not only because I had been robbed, but also because of the fairness in the way I handled the situation. The entire neighborhood began to look at me differently. I wasn't someone easily exploited, and they understood that I didn't act hastily, but had carefully considered my decision before taking action. Meanwhile, Karen had to face increasingly harsh criticism. She became the laughingstock of the neighborhood, and people began telling stories about her greed and arrogance. The jokes about her being attacked by cockroaches in her house spread quickly. The entire neighborhood knew, and no one saw her as a person of credibility anymore. After I sent the video to the HOA and the truth about Karen was exposed, it seemed like everything was over. But no, Karen refused to give up. A week after she was condemned by the community, I was unexpectedly served with a lawsuit. In the lawsuit, Karen accused me of deliberately setting a trap for her by letting her eat the honeyed food, intending to attract cockroaches into her house. She claimed that my actions were a form of mental assault and destruction of personal property. Karen even demanded that I compensate her for damages and the disruption to her life. "How could I have known your food had honey and cockroaches?" Karen wrote in the lawsuit. "You intentionally created a dangerous situation, making it impossible for me to live in a safe environment. I won't let you get away with this." When I read her lawsuit, I could hardly believe my eyes. She really thought she could turn the tables and find a way to blame me, while she was the one who had caused everything. But I wasn't afraid. I knew that everything I did was legal and completely justified. Moreover, I hadn't done anything wrong. I was simply protecting my work and my honor. While Karen was surely thinking she could reverse the situation, the HOA couldn't overlook her actions. The board quickly reviewed Karen's lawsuit and called an emergency meeting to assess the situation. All the evidence I had sent carried great weight, not just about Karen stealing my food, but also about her inability to justify her wrong actions. A week later, I received an official notification from the HOA. Karen's lawsuit had been completely dismissed. The board decided that her actions were not only unreasonable, but also harmed the credibility and unity of the community. The HOA members unanimously agreed that her deliberate attempts to sabotage my work and destroy trust in the neighborhood were unacceptable. The HOA's decision didn't stop there. Karen was required to leave the HOA immediately. She not only lost control within the community, but also had to face humiliation from those who once saw her as an influential person. After this decision, she could no longer participate in any meetings and lost all privileges in the neighborhood. When the news about Karen being expelled from the HOA spread, the entire neighborhood began buzzing. My neighbors, those who had once merely observed, now stood up to defend me more than ever. They began joking and referring to Karen as a laughingstock. "She's been kicked out of the HOA." One neighbor said, "She can go somewhere else and stop causing trouble for us." Karen was now not just a failure in my eyes, but also the target of the entire neighborhood's criticism. She no longer had a place in this community. Meanwhile, I felt relieved and proud knowing that I had stood my ground and protected my work and honor. The neighbors, who had once barely cared about me, now looked at me with respect, and I felt like I had regained control over my life. Karen may have thought she could turn things around, but in the end, she was the one who had to face the consequences of her thoughtless actions. Karen not only failed miserably in her revenge plot, but also had to face a series of severe consequences, both for her personal reputation and legally. She never imagined that her actions would lead to her complete exposure. After being exposed to the HOA community, she lost all the power and respect she had once proudly claimed to have. I was able to continue my work without worrying about any interference or sabotage from her. What was more important was that I knew I had protected my work and my honor, while sending a strong message to everyone that no one could take advantage of me without facing consequences. Not long after, I began hearing discussions about Karen. Her former neighbors were no longer hesitant. They began criticizing her severely. She didn't just steal food. She also made the whole neighborhood tense, one neighbor said. She probably didn't expect someone living peacefully like that to be pushed to this point. Another one commented, "Karen deserves the consequences. Never mess with someone without knowing what you're doing." Karen's actions not only caused her to lose the trust of everyone around her, but also completely destroyed her image in the HOA community. She was seen as a nuisance, someone no one wanted to be close to or cooperate with. Little by little, everything she had built, including her control and power in this neighborhood, was now collapsing. Part of me felt sorry for her, but most of me felt satisfied that justice had been served. During these days, I learned an important lesson. Sometimes, subtle and discreet revenge has more power than anything else. I didn't need to engage in loud confrontations or make a big fuss. Just a smart and clever strategy, and everything would settle on its own. In situations like this, silence is the best strategy. The silence of someone who knows they are in control of everything without needing to show off or react impulsively. I sat back for a moment, enjoying the peaceful moments I had regained. Then, I remembered a saying I wanted to send to Karen, the one who had caused all this trouble, now facing the consequences of her own actions. "So, Karen," I thought quietly, "the statue stands out not just because of its beauty, but because of a lesson worth remembering. Never try to confront someone without thinking about the consequences."